We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, the money nerve.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I've got a guest for you this week. But before I get to my guest, I do want to again talk very quickly about our sponsor. Those of you that are longtime listeners know that our sponsor is Sam Cohen, the owner of Attorneys First Insurance. They write errors and omissions or professional liability insurance. Malpractice insurance is also what it's called for attorneys and title companies all over the country. Right now, Attorneys First is focusing specifically on Florida, where they're located, and Texas, but I know they can write for almost any attorney or title company all over the country. So if you are an attorney or title company, or if you know an attorney or title company, a great way to support the show would be to support our sponsor by making an introduction, and you can reach Sam at attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com. But I'm excited to get to my guest this week. My guest is Bob Wheeler. He is on a crusade for personal growth. He's cross-pollinated his accounting practice, which we're going to talk about, to create a new approach to personal finances. His passion is to help others gain insights about how their emotions trigger financial decisions. He combines finances with behaviors, explores the personal concept of creating a healthy relationship with money in his book, The Money Nerve, Navigating the Emotions of Money, his online course, Mastering the Emotions of Money, and his podcast, Money You Should Ask. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
So I want to talk about, we were talking pre-show, pre-interview here. You know, I graduated with a degree in accounting, nowhere near eligible to sit for the CPA. Went on to law school after that. But how do you marry the concept of, and I do want to get a lot into your relationship with money and emotions around money, but how do you marry that with the CPA? Talk a little bit about how that came to be.
Yeah, so CPA, 2 + 2 is 4, pretty straightforward, very black and white. So I thought. And I got into accounting because it's a very closed system. If the answer is wrong, it's your fault, user error. So I felt very comfortable, and I think a lot of accountants feel very comfortable with the safety of a system that is theoretically unflawed. So what happened for me is, as I started working with clients, and some of my tax meetings turned into therapy sessions, but what I noticed was people would go out and do the exact opposite of what seemed like very sound practical advice. And I'm thinking, what are you doing, people? Right? But at the same time, I was looking at my own personal finances and aware that I was doing some self-sabotage, that even though I had the title, even though I had the skill set and the knowledge to help other people, I wasn't doing so great myself. In other words, I had staff people that were in lesser positions making better financial choices than me. Oh, I'm buying a house. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? So it was sort of a self journey, and also just realizing how many clients were not making logical decisions, but were making emotional decisions, that I got really curious about how that really played into everything. So it wasn't my initial goal. My goal was, let's do taxes, bill a client, make some money. And it more turned into relationships and really understanding where people were coming from.
You know, it's interesting because that's a lot of where my practice and my podcast came from. Like I said, I graduated with a degree in accounting. I went into law school, and now I'm what people call a dirt lawyer. I do real estate law, basically. But that led then to foreclosures and short sales and loan modifications and bankruptcy. And that's a lot of what I see in my bankruptcy practice, is people letting their emotions drive their decisions around money. So how do we recognize that? How do we deal with that? How do we, I don't want to say fix that, but how do we recognize it and deal with it?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to start talking about it, right? when I first had the book and I was talking to my editor, she said to me, it's great you're writing this book about money and emotions, but that doesn't affect everybody. It doesn't affect me. I don't make any decisions based on emotions. And I said, oh, really? Well, let me ask you this. Who pays for lunch when you go out to dinner with your dad? Or who pays for lunch when you go out with your dad? Well, he does. I'm his little princess. Well, who pays for lunch when you go out with your mom? Well, I do, because I feel bad that my dad left her and she's all alone. Who pays for lunch when you go out with your sister? Well, we're equals. Oh, okay, I get it. Right? So even in that, she was so convinced that she doesn't make any emotional decisions. And it's just having that awareness of, like, watch people try to split a bill in a large group of people, and people run for the hills, or people try to pay for everything so people think they're amazing, or people try to, so it's there. We make these decisions all day. Do I eat lunch with my coworkers and impress them? Do I bring my lunch and everybody thinks I'm cheap or frugal? And we're making decisions all the time. And so as the more we can get aware of that, we can then start saying, well, do I really care about that? Or is the story that I'm telling myself true? So many people say, I'm broke. And they're really just cash flow negative at the moment. They've got millions of dollars worth of assets. They're not poor.
Right.
And so we just start to have these conversations to realize, oh my gosh, there's a lot that goes into my money.
Right. Well, and I guess it's okay to say, and sometimes we do start to get that more healthy relationship to say, hey, look, you paid last time, I'll pay this time. Or, right. But how do we start to recognize it? How do we start to make that healthy relationship? I mean, part of this I've even gone back to, and I've said on other shows before, I had an ex-girlfriend, and she always used to say, well, all you care about is money. And that wasn't, it seemed that way at the time, but that wasn't really true. I need the money to take you out on a good date. I need the money to take you on a nice vacation. It's not all about the money. It's all about what the money can do for us. So, and that's probably why she's my ex now, because we had such divergent thoughts about money. But how do you start to create that healthy relationship?
So the first thing that I do when a client is sort of getting a little antsy or not wanting to go forward with something, I want to get an understanding of where they come from. So when I'm working with somebody, I want to know, what did you learn as a child? What did your parents say? Or more importantly, what did they not say about money? And start to really get some history going on there. Was I the rich kid in school? Was I the poor kid? Did I grow up in a religious environment that was very conservative or very liberal? Did I grow up with hippie parents? Right? All these things that start to play in where money, who cares? Or money, like, you've got to watch every dollar. And then what were the judgments when you asked for money? Did parents talk to you about it? Did they tell you were evil and greedy? Did they help you work out a plan? Did they match your savings? And so to start to understand all of that. And then I really work with people to start listening to what they say. I'm broke. And then really start to find out what's true and what's story, so that we can reframe our languaging and be more intentional in what we say, as well as then start looking at budgets. So I really like working with people on budgets, what I call honest budgeting, because a lot of people, they'll put things down, but they're not true, or they don't want to admit that they have a spending habit or whatever it might be. When I'm with a group of people, I'm like, look, if you've got an addiction, put it in the budget. I don't care what you're doing. I need to know where the money's going so I can make sure you have enough for next week's addiction, right? It's like, it's not about judgment. It's about, let's get really clear. And once we start to do that and people start getting honest, then we can actually have some movement to having a healthier relationship.
Yeah, I've talked about that kind of stuff too, in terms of, as a bankruptcy attorney, we've got to submit the budget to the bankruptcy court. And so, I had one guy once who, I think, put in his budget like $1,500 a month for food. And he was a single guy. I'm like, where are you putting $1,500 a month in food? And he said, well, I date a lot. I'm like, well, if you want to file bankruptcy, you may need to dial back your social life a little bit there. But it's actually been kind of therapeutic for me. I've been able to help clients stop smoking. I've been able to help clients cut back on smoking, cut back on, drinking, cut back on gambling, and not just that kind of stuff. Cut back on food. Make different choices in terms of not going out to eat and eating at home and those kinds of things to save some money. So it's actually been, I don't do this to the level that you do, but in terms of advising people on bankruptcies, it's interesting.
Well, it's interesting that you do bankruptcy, because I have people that hesitate to do a bankruptcy because their parents will judge them, their family might judge them. And even if it's the best thing that they could do, there's all this guilt. And I have to explain that there was this bankruptcy was built as a way to course correct for somebody that gets off course. But I was talking with the bankruptcy attorney a couple of years ago. I was asking him to work with a client, and he always likes to interview them, decide if he's going to help them or not, because he was telling me he just had that day, he had two people come in, and one person had come in and they had a terminally ill kid. There was all these things going on, and he just, his heart was in it. He felt, terrible. The next group that came in, this family, they were trying to get their bankruptcy cleared, but they were trying to figure out if they could still run $30,000 on the credit card for their kid's Sweet 16 party before they did everything. And, he's like, I try not to judge, but like, I have a lot of heart for the first person, not so much for the second person. And it's all emotional.
Yeah, it is really hard. It's really hard not to judge, and I try not to judge in any situation. But yeah, early in my career, I had a family come in. They wanted to file bankruptcy. They needed to file bankruptcy, but before they did, they needed to put $8,000 rims on their car.
Right.
I'm like, no, you really don't. Number one, and number two, if you do, it becomes an asset of the bankruptcy estate when we file anyway. So, so yeah, I've dealt with a lot of those issues too. I did want to ask you. So one of the things on your bio, and I know from your bio you also are a world traveler. Climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, ascended to the Mount Everest base camp, hiked a whole bunch of mountains, running a Greek marathon. I know you're involved in the comedic scene, but there's a couple things on here. What happened in Africa that changed your beliefs around money?
Yeah, so the first time I went to Africa, and I've been there a couple times since, I love Africa. When I went to Africa, I was socialized that we are our accomplishments, right? So I got to have money in the bank. I got to have a house by a certain age, and these things are important. And I was in Africa, in Tanzania, where the average income at the time was $100 a year, and these people were incredibly happy. And they were incredibly grateful, and they were incredibly giving. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with them. Like, I just kept going, you don't even have a car. Your shoes have holes in them. How can you be so nice? How can you? And it really was messed with my mind, because I was like, no, you've got to have these goals, and you've got to do this. I knew it like 8 years old. I wanted to be a lawyer. And, then I got to college and I met some attorneys and I went, I want to be an accountant. So,
Yeah.
For me, it was like all about goals, and you got to accomplish, and then you got to get to the next one. And these people weren't all about that at all. They were about, we have an amazing family. We're grateful to be breathing. And it really made me stop and take pause and realize that my priorities were a bit off for me. That may not be everybody, but for me, I realized, wow, this isn't really what I'm about. I do want to find happiness, and I actually do want to find gratitude and joy in living, instead of it all being about producing.
Well, and I think that's the important thing. It's all about balance, and whether we're talking about finances, whether we're talking about family, whatever, it's all about balance. I mean, even if it's scraping together a few dollars to, one of the things people ask me about bankruptcy all the time, I can't take a vacation. Well, no, you can absolutely take a vacation. Now you can't, go on safari in Africa,
right? But
maybe you can take 2 days out. We're here in Tampa, Florida. Take 2 days and go to the beach in St. Pete, go to the beach in Clearwater. It's even in finances, it's all about the balance.
Absolutely. I think people think we either have to punish ourselves, or we get to be all about pleasure, and it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told this story or not before, but when I first moved here to this area from Miami, I grew up in Miami. went to college, went to law school, moved back to Miami to start practicing, and then got a job up here in the Tampa Bay area. And I came up here, I moved here October-ish of 2001, and I remember going to the mall right around my birthday, which is in December. And I remember going to the mall, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't really know anybody. I'm not really going to have a huge birthday party. I'm not really going to go out because I don't know anybody. I know a handful of people from work and a handful of people in and around Tampa Bay. And so I bought myself a birthday present. I bought myself a flask with my initials engraved in it. And it wasn't a lot of money, but it was, I bought myself a birthday present because I wanted, I had made the decision to move away from my whole support system and family in Miami and start this new job and journey and career up here in Tampa Bay. And I wanted to get myself a nice present for it.
That's awesome. And I think too often we don't actually do nice things for ourselves. We'll do it later.
Right.
We'll do it later.
Right.
And do you still have the flask?
I do, although I don't know what happened. The flask sprung got a hole in it or somewhere. It doesn't hold the liquor anymore, but I'm also a sentimental pack rat. So I've still got it. I just use a different flask now.
There you go.
So I know you talk a lot about baby steps, and something happened in Nepal when you were trekking to the base camp of Everest. So what happened there?
Yeah. So, well, to me, baby steps are an amazing thing. And in that moment, when we were in Nepal, it sort of came to me in the moment, even though I realized I had been doing this in the past. But what happened was we hiked the first day. I had a group of friends and we were all ready to do our, 15, 17 days trekking to the base camp. And the first day is a little rough. And at the end of the first day, everybody looked at me and said, wow, this is really rough. Let's quit. Let's go back. I'm like, wait a minute. I spent a lot of money. I'm getting my money's worth. I'm freaking going to base camp. And so the only thing I could think to do was, let's negotiate. How about we just hike for an hour? And then at the end of an hour, let's stop and decide if we're going to hike another hour. And so what we did was, for the first 5 days of the trip, 5 or 6 days of the trip, we stopped every hour and decided whether or not we were going to go another hour. And what that did was it only made us focus on the next hour. We weren't focused on it. We've got to get over 3 mountains to get to base camp. It was just, we have to get to that hill. We have to get to that ravine. And by the 5th, 6th day, we were able to, let's just hike for 4 hours. Can we agree to that? Let's hike 4 hours. It just made it much more digestible. And it helped me get where I wanted to go because these people wanted to go back. And I was just, how do I do this? And so baby steps for me is the way, whether I'm trying to work on my finances, whether I'm trying to reach a life goal, whether I'm hiking, baby steps.
Yeah. Well, and I think it works. I think it works in finances as well. In other words, if you've got this massive credit card debt, don't worry about paying down the massive credit card debt in one chunk. Worry about paying more than the minimum payment.
That's right. And I think in this day and age, most people are trying to get from A to Z. And I try to help people get from A to B, and then we'll get to C once we complete B. And to just slow it down and do it in digestible bites.
Yeah. How was it? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time?
One bite at a time. Exactly. Exactly.
So that was, I am obviously not a comedian based on that joke. But I know you're heavily involved. You're the CFO of the world famous Comedy Store.
I am.
So how do you transition from, I guess CPA to comedy? I don't know if there can be two totally divergent things.
Well, hey, Bob Newhart was a CPA. He worked for the sales tax folks in California. He used to read the tax code before he got his start. Interestingly enough, I was doing stand-up comedy so I could pay the bills, obviously. And I was doing comedy at the store. I was running a couple shows, and basically they were having some payroll issues. IRS was ready to close the doors. And Mitzi called me up and she's like, Bob, you got to help us. We got to figure this out. And, I said, all right. Don't tell anybody I'm a CPA because I really just want to do comedy. But, Mitzi trusted me. I helped get them out of some situations. And a lot of my friends were comics. So I was wanting to make sure we had a club to perform at, because the Comedy Store has an amazing history of people that have gone through it. And so, yeah, it just sort of became a love fest for me to be with the Comedy Store. But I'm a very left brain, right brain kind of person. And I think a lot of people are either left brain or right brain. And I've always been the comic reading the Wall Street Journal, or the accountant trying to crack a joke. So
Are you still doing stand up, or is that?
I still do some comedy here and there. It's harder right now because, of course, now everybody does know I'm the CFO of the Comedy Store. And so I can go up and do a set, and I get off set and people are, hey, there's an insurance guy in the downstairs, or the health inspector's downstairs. I'm like, can I just have 5 minutes on the stage? So, or I have to sign a check or something. So when I perform, it's usually at coffee houses and little smaller venues, just because I don't have to take care of business.
Well, or as the CFO, you can make them laugh at you.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, that is totally true.
You could do that as well. So
they're not as authentic.
No, but still, I mean, I might leverage that if I had to. Although I'm I sometimes am funny, but I know that's very different than being a comedian. So I don't know that I would ever make it there. So if people want to contact you, it's The Money Nerve, NERVE, themoneynerve.com.
That is correct.
And I know you've also got a podcast, right?
Yes.
And I assume it's available, so wherever they're listening to this show, they can find your show as well.
Absolutely. All the big podcast players.
Okay. And it's called Money You Should Ask.
Money You Should Ask. And I have guests on there, and we talk about like their money beliefs, money blocks, life challenges, a lot of successful people that tell their story, actors and people of some notoriety. And we just have a lot of fun.
Nice. And then you've also got the book, The Money Nerve, Navigating the Emotions of Money. And I assume that's available at themoneynerve.com.
It is available there. It's available at Amazon. And it's a great workbook for people to sit, especially with a partner, husband, wife, and work and just sort of discover their money nerves together. Very
nice. So anything that I didn't ask you, anything that we left out or that we didn't talk about?
Well, I think, the one thing I would say that for a lot of people out there that struggle with money issues or think that they're the only one, the common thing that I've found over the years, whether it's with my clients, whether I do workshops or whether I do speaking presentations, is people come up to me and tell me they thought they were the only one. So there's a lot of isolation around financial choices. I'm sure you discover that in bankruptcy. They're just not running around going, folks, I just filed BK. And so for people out there listening, you're not the only one. You're not alone. It's just something we don't talk about. We'd rather talk about sex and politics than talk about our debt or our real financial situation. And that there's no shame in that. If we didn't get the download, if we didn't get the lessons, if we didn't get taught financial literacy, there's no shame in learning it now. And so I think that's the big message I would say to people is just get out and learn and ask questions and don't be afraid. And lots of people in the same boat.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the questions that I always ask when I'm talking to somebody about bankruptcy is, excuse me, how much debt do you owe? In other words, if you hit the lottery, you could write a check, you could pay everybody off. What is that number? Because I need to get a sense of,
right,
what's going on with the budget. And it's funny because I can tell as soon as I ask that question, I see the gears turning in their head and I see them thinking to themselves, what number can I tell Sean that won't embarrass me? And the thing that they don't understand, the biggest amount of debt I've ever had anyone ever tell me that they owe is $15 million. Right. So somebody that comes to me and says I owe $50,000, I've heard more.
Right.
$100,000, I've heard more. $200,000, I've heard more. So it's interesting. I sort of diverted onto this issue of money and mindset and all that kind of stuff by those types of issues. So it's interesting to talk to somebody else that has more of a focus on it.
Everybody's got a story. It's just about whether or not you're going to keep it a secret or share it and not make yourself bad.
Right. Well, and again, people that share it with me, it's confidential. It's attorney-client privilege. I can't tell anybody about it anyway.
Exactly.
So, Well, thank you. I really appreciate you being a guest on this week's show. And I would encourage everybody, go to themoneynerve.com, get a copy of the book, go check out Bob on wherever you listen to the podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, all the artificial intelligence ladies, wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Bob Wheeler. Check out his show. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate you being a guest on this week's episode.
Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate it.
And I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. I hope for all of you out there listening, especially after this show, I hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. That'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.